All right, we're about to go on a journey. I mean, way, way back in time to uncover what might be the single most powerful piece of technology our ancestors ever invented. And spoiler alert, it's probably not what you're thinking, but it is, without a doubt, the reason we're all here today.
So let me just ask you, right off the bat, what do you think it was? What was humanity's greatest invention? The one thing that truly put us on the path to, well, to becoming us.
Maybe your mind immediately jumps to something obvious, like fire. Game changer, right? Gave us warmth, cooked food, kept the scary things away. Or maybe the wheel, the very symbol of progress. Or hey, what about the spear? That definitely leveled up our hunting game. And look, those are all fantastic answers, but they're not the one we're looking for.
Get this. Humanity's single greatest invention was its social structure, specifically a totally radical and incredibly flexible idea of kinship, of family. An idea that wasn't just built on biology, but was engineered for one thing, and one thing only: survival.
Now, to really get why this was so revolutionary, you have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to understand the number one problem of life back in the Paleolithic, just staying alive in a world that was, well, pretty dangerous. So, how did they pull it off? They engineered this brilliant social solution. First, they lived in these small, tight-knit bands where sharing wasn't just nice, it was the law of the land. And raising kids, that was a group project. We call it cooperative breeding. But here's the real genius move. They created kinship with people they weren't even related to. They built these strategic alliances that widened their support network and, crucially, their gene pool. There's even evidence that men would often move to live with their wife's family, which makes perfect sense, right? It gives a new mother the support of her own family right when she needs it most. This wasn't just a community. It was a finely tuned survival machine.
Okay, so you've got this complex, messy web of relationships, but how in the world do you organize all of that? How do you create rules for who can marry whom and who belongs to what group when you don't have writing or money or courts?
Well, you invent a kind of symbolic glue. It's called totemism. And it's an absolutely brilliant system that links a human group to a natural species, say a bear or an eagle, and in one single move, it solves three huge problems. First, it gives everyone a shared, sacred identity. We are the Bear Clan. That's who we are. Second, it instantly creates marriage rules. You can't marry someone from your own totem, which forces you to create alliances with other clans. And third, it actually helps manage the ecosystem, because it becomes taboo to hunt your own totem animal. It's a kind of built-in conservation plan.
And this gets to the core of it, something the sociologist Amiel Durkheim pointed out. When the Bear Clan worshipped the bear, they weren't really just worshipping an animal. They were worshipping themselves. They were reinforcing their own identity, their own unity, and the sacred rules that literally held their world together. The survival of the group itself became the most sacred thing of all.
Okay, but this whole system kind of hinges on a pretty big question, doesn't it? Why would anyone believe that a bear is their ancestor? I mean, what kind of worldview makes that seem normal or even logical?
The answer is a worldview called animism. This was the foundational philosophy for our ancestors, and it's the belief that the world isn't filled with objects, it's filled with persons. Everything, the river, the rocks, the trees, the animals, had a spirit, an intention, a kind of consciousness.
I mean, just think about that for a second. That is such a profound shift from how most of us see the world today. For them, survival wasn't about conquering nature or using its resources. It was about maintaining good social relationships with everyone, including all these non-human persons. You had to show respect, you had to ask for permission. So in that world, having a bear as an ancestor wasn't weird at all. It was just being related to another powerful and important person in your community.
Okay, so that's the cultural software that's running. But what about the cognitive hardware? What is it about the human brain itself that makes us so ready to believe that the world is alive and full of intention in the first place?
Well, say hello to the ghost in the machine. It's a cognitive tool that researchers have a great name for, the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HAD for short. Basically, it's an evolutionary tripwire that's hardwired into our brains, and it makes us see agency, purpose, intention, everywhere, even when it isn't really there. And the evolutionary logic for this is just brutally simple. Picture this. You're walking through the tall grass and you hear a rustle. Now, a false positive is thinking it's a lion when it's just the wind. What's the cost? You jump, you waste a little energy. No big deal. But a false negative? That's thinking it's the wind when it is a lion. And the cost of that mistake is, well, you're out of the gene pool. So evolution strongly selected for brains that made the first, much safer mistake. So this hyperactive little system is constantly feeding us this raw, gut-level intuition. A branch snaps in the forest, a shadow moves in the corner of your eye, and your brain just screams, something is there. And that's where culture steps in. Animism takes that raw feeling from your head and gives it a name, gives it a story. It's not just something, it's the spirit of the cave. And by the way, this exact same mental wiring is why we see faces in the clouds or assume there's a plan behind random events today. It's the ancient root of everything from simple superstitions to complex conspiracy theories. Before our ancestors, it was the critical link that organized their intuitions into a worldview, which then supported their totemism, which held their entire society together. So we've got this incredibly intricate system of social rules, spiritual beliefs, and cognitive biases, all working together. But who was in charge of all this? Who were the keepers of this vital social code? Well, first up, you had the elders. Think of them as the group's living, breathing library. They held all the practical, real-world knowledge, where to find water, how to track game, and most importantly, they were the living kinship map. They knew who was related to whom, who owed what to whom, and they settled all the disputes to keep the peace. And then you had the shamans. They were the other side of the coin, the spiritual specialists. They were the ones who mediated with that vast, animistic world of non-human persons. They were the ones who managed uncertainty, who healed the sick, and who performed the all-important rituals that made beliefs like totemism feel real and sacred. So you see, it was this really elegant complementary division of labor. The elder managed the horizontal relationships, human to human, making sure everyday life ran smoothly. And the shaman managed the vertical relationships, human to cosmos, making sure the spiritual world was in balance. Together they formed the complete leadership infrastructure for survival. Now, I know this all might seem like something from a dusty old textbook, but this social blueprint, this thing that was forged during the Ice Age, it is a living legacy. Its echoes are literally all around us today. You know that deep-seated Paleolithic ethos of sharing resources for the good of the group? It never went away. It lives on today in our modern ideals of social justice, fairness, and reciprocity. That gut feeling that we have a duty to care for one another in our community. And what about that brilliant ancient strategy of creating kinship with non-relatives? We still do that all the time. Every time a child is adopted or fostered, or even when a godparent is named at a ceremony, that is a modern echo of our ancestors building families based on commitment and love, not just on blood. So that leaves us with a pretty big thought to chew on. Our ancestors' greatest invention, the social technology that allowed our species to survive and thrive, was built on a foundation of cooperation, flexible kinship, and a deep sense of connection to each other and the world. The question for us today is, what are we building our society on?
So, today we're tackling one of the biggest questions out there. How did we, as a species, build civilization? And the answer? Well, it might not be what you think. It's not just about farming or building cities. It's about inventing a new kind of God that was, for all intents and purposes, a new kind of technology.
All right, let's set the scene. Go back about 12,000 years. The Neolithic Revolution is just kicking off. We're starting to farm, we're settling down, and because of that, our populations are just exploding. But this creates a huge, huge problem. I mean, the way we lived for millennia, in these small, tight-knit groups, that just wasn't going to work anymore. So the big question is, how did we build these massive societies full of thousands of strangers without everything just collapsing into total chaos?
And the solution? It was an absolutely brilliant piece of social software. You can think of it as a new operating system for humanity. And that technology, that breakthrough innovation, was the concept of a high God. This wasn't just another nature spirit or a local deity. No, this was a whole new framework for how human beings could live together on a massive scale.
To really get why this was so revolutionary, we have to understand just how big of a problem our ancestors were actually facing. Let's call it the Great Expansion problem.
Think about the before and after picture here.
In the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, we lived in these tiny, mobile bands, maybe a few dozen people. Everybody knew everybody. Trust was all based on family and face-to-face relationships. Then, bam, the Neolithic hits. Suddenly, we're living in permanent settlements with thousands of people. You're surrounded by strangers. You've got social classes, hierarchies. It's a completely different world.
And this leads to what sociologists call scalar stress. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. It's the breaking point that happens when a group just gets too big for everyone to know and trust each other personally. The old social rulebook? It just doesn't work anymore. I mean, how do you get thousands of people who are basically strangers to cooperate on a huge project, like building an irrigation system or defending the village?
To really see why we needed a brand new solution, let's take a quick look at the old toolkit, at how our hunter-gatherer ancestors managed to keep things together. It was all about spreading power out. So politically, power back then was really fluid. It was situational. The best hunter might lead the hunt for that day, sure, but he wasn't a permanent boss. The group made sure no one person got too dominant. But then, in the Neolithic, that completely flips. We start seeing the rise of the institutionalized chief, the big man, a formal, permanent position of power, often passed down through family, that rules over a specific territory.
And you know what? The exact same thing happened with spiritual authority. The individual shaman who got their power from a personal vision or experience, they get replaced by a full-time, organized priesthood. Belief in all these local, quirky nature spirits starts to merge into a pantheon of specialized gods. And rituals? They move out of caves and into these huge, permanent, purpose-built temples.
So, here's the bottom line. The old way of doing things, the whole system based on personal reputation and spread-out authority, it worked great for small groups, but it was completely, totally unprepared to handle the sheer scale and complexity of a big, settled farming civilization. They desperately needed a new tool. And this brings us right to the solution, the invention of a brand new religious operating system, one that was specifically designed to solve this massive problem of scale. I mean, just let that quote sink in for a second. Religion operated as a vital governance technology. This is a huge shift in thinking. It frames religion not just as something people believed in, but as a practical tool, a social innovation that actually allowed early civilizations to work. It was the thing that made it possible to manage huge projects and create social glue among thousands of strangers.
At the very core of this new operating system was a very specific kind of God, what academics call a morally punishing high god, or MPHG for short. Now, this wasn't just some super powerful god. This god had a very specific job description. It was all-knowing. It was deeply involved in what humans were doing, and it would reward or punish you based on how you behaved toward everyone, not just your own family and friends.
So just think about the features of this new software. An all-seeing God means everyone is accountable all the time, even when no person is looking. This is huge for enforcing cooperation between strangers. It solves that classic collective action problem. You know, why should I break my back helping to build the community irrigation ditch if I can just sit back and get the benefits from everyone else's work? Well, now there's a reason. A God is watching, and that God is keeping score. It's like the ultimate surveillance system.
So, where on earth did this incredibly useful idea come from? Well, it wasn't some kind of overnight revelation. Instead, it was forged right at the intersection of three massive developments happening during the Neolithic.
So let's break these down. There are three key pillars here: a new political need, a new scientific blueprint that came from the stars, and a new kind of cultural cement made of stone.
First up, the political need. Okay, so society is getting way more hierarchical. You've got powerful chiefs and eventually kings at the very top. How do you justify that? How do you explain why one guy and his family get to be in charge of everyone else? Well, what better way than to create a divine hierarchy that looks exactly like the human one? A supreme, all-powerful God gives the ultimate seal of approval to a supreme, all-powerful king. The king isn't just some guy you see. He's the God's representative on earth. Second, you have the scientific blueprint. For the first time ever, people are settled farmers, so they are meticulously tracking the seasons by watching the sky. They see the sun, the moon, the stars, all moving with this incredible, predictable regularity. This cosmic order gives them the perfect mental model for a totally new kind of God. The divine isn't some moody, local river spirit anymore. It's a universal, transcendent, law-giving deity who regulates the entire cosmos. This is really the birth of the sky god. And finally, the cultural cement. To make this new, abstract God feel real, you've got to build for them. These huge projects, things like temples and giant stone circles, required massive, coordinated labor from the entire community. And the very act of building them reinforced the power of the priests and chiefs who were organizing the whole thing. And once they were built, these incredible, awe-inspiring structures stood there as a permanent, physical reminder of the power of the gods and their leaders on Earth.
So, what was the end result of this powerful new religious technology? Well, it was nothing less than a complete revolution in human culture, politics, and power. What we see is this profound theological shift. The older gods, often these localized Earth Mother goddesses who are all about the immediate cycles of fertility in nature, they slowly get replaced by a transcendent, universal Sky Father. This new god isn't so concerned with whether your crops grow, he's concerned with cosmic order, universal moral laws, and, this is crucial, legitimizing the new male-dominated political structures. It was basically a divine stamp of approval on a whole new social order.
And the legacy of this Neolithic invention is just immense. This template, the idea of a single, supreme God who oversees a universal moral order for all people, it didn't just fade away. It became the fundamental ideological blueprint for the major monotheistic religions that still shape billions of lives on our world today.
Which kind of leaves us with a big final question to chew on. When we look around at our modern world with its ideas of universal law, moral accountability, and centralized authority, how much of it is still running on this 12,000-year-old operating system? An OS that was first designed to solve the simple but profound problem of getting strangers to learn how to live together.
Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into a pretty provocative idea. What if one of the world's biggest religions wasn't just born from pure faith, but was actually engineered to run an empire? That's the argument we're digging into today. The claim that Nicene Christianity was deliberately pieced together for a very specific geopolitical goal, controlling the Roman Empire.
So that's the big question, right? And the answer our source material gives us is, well, pretty radical. It suggests this whole story wasn't about a gentle, organic evolution of belief. Nope, it was a deliberate, almost calculated process to build an ideology tough enough to hold a massive, sprawling empire together. According to the sources we're looking at, this whole thing happened in 3 distinct stages. First, you have influence, powerful new ideas crashing into each other. Then comes adaptation, where those ideas get tweaked and reshaped so they can appeal to everyone. And the final step? Institutionalization. That's when the state steps in, takes control, and makes it official.
All right, let's jump in. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at why Rome even needed a new ideology. Then we'll check out the raw ingredients, these 2 really different worldviews that were floating around. We'll see how they got blended into a powerful new story, how that story was adapted for a global audience, and finally, how the state moved in to lock it all down.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The Roman Empire was huge. I mean, it was diverse, sprawling, and honestly, a total nightmare to govern. To keep it all from falling apart, they needed more than just legions and roads. They needed a single unifying idea, a belief system that everyone from a soldier in Britain to a merchant in Egypt could get behind. The seeds for this were actually planted way earlier. The Hellenistic period, the era right after Alexander the Great, created this incredible cultural melting pot. Think of it like a giant philosophical blender where ideas from Persia, Greece, and Judea were all getting mixed together, creating something totally new and powerful. Now, let's talk about the 2 main worldviews that provided the raw materials for this new faith. You can think of them as the 2 primary ingredients in the recipe for an imperial religion. So on one hand, you've got the ancient Persian religion, Zoroastrianism. Its whole deal is this epic cosmic war between a god who is pure good and light and an equally powerful independent god of darkness and evil. Then, on the other hand, you have Second Temple Judaism. It's built on this radical, super exclusive monotheism. There is one God, and he has a special deal, a covenant, with one specific group of people. And this is where it gets really fascinating. During the Persian period, when Jewish communities were living under Persian rule, they were exposed to all these Zoroastrian ideas. And that encounter sparked a kind of fusion, creating a brand new, incredibly compelling cosmic story.
Now, while Jewish thought held on tight to its core belief in one God, it started absorbing some of these really powerful Zoroastrian concepts. You can see them right here. Things like a final judgment for all, resurrection of the dead, and this one is the game changer, the idea of a powerful, independent arch-enemy to God. See, before this influence, the figure of Hasatan in the early Hebrew texts isn't God's enemy at all. The name literally means the accuser, and he's more like a divine prosecuting attorney. He works for God, testing people's loyalty. He's on the payroll, part of the heavenly administration. And boom, here's the transformation. Influenced by that Zoroastrian archenemy, Angra Mainyu, the figure evolves into Satan, a full-blown cosmic adversary, the leader of the rebellion against God. This single shift creates the entire narrative of spiritual warfare that becomes absolutely central to Christianity. Okay, so now you've got a faith with this incredible cosmic drama, but it's still connected to one specific people. The next critical step was to adapt it, to make this evolved faith scalable, portable, and appealing to absolutely everyone in the Greco-Roman world. This was the masterstroke. Early Christianity took this idea of a divine covenant, which had been for just one ethnic group, and made the strategic move to make it universal. By getting rid of barriers like strict ethnic laws, the faith was suddenly portable. Anyone, anywhere in the empire could join. And to make it intellectually appealing to the educated elites, the Romans and Greeks, early theologians grabbed a popular concept from Hellenistic philosophy, the logos, which basically means divine reason or word. They used this idea to frame Jesus Christ as the perfect divine go-between, the logical bridge connecting a perfect, remote God to our messy material world. So if you look at this table, you can really see the whole synthesis in action. Christianity basically took the cosmic drama and the clear enemy from Zoroastrianism, fused it with the rock-solid monotheism of Judaism, and then wrapped the whole thing in Greek philosophy to make it sound smart and accessible to everyone. It was, you could argue, the perfect ideological package. And that brings us to the final and most decisive stage of the process. Once this faith was perfectly built for mass appeal, the Roman state itself stepped in and seized control. It was no longer just a belief system. It was about to become a powerful tool of imperial government. Just look at how fast this all happened. It's kind of breathtaking. In less than 70 years, Christianity goes from being tolerated to being protected to being the only official state-mandated religion. And notice the key detail. Emperors aren't just adopting the faith anymore. They're now personally deciding what its core beliefs are. The linchpin for this state control was enforcing total doctrinal unity. At the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine basically forced the adoption of a single, very technical Greek philosophical term, homoousios. It means of one substance, and it was used to define the Father and Son as being made of the exact same divine stuff. This wasn't just theology, it was a political metaphor for a single, unified, indivisible empire. And if you want to see the result, just read this quote from the Edict of Thessalonica. It is chilling. Theology and state power are now one and the same. If you disagreed with the emperor's official definition of the Trinity, you weren't just a heretic, you were a foolish madman, a criminal, and you would face the punishment of our authority. So all those famous ecumenical councils, they weren't really just church meetings to debate theology. They were instruments of imperial policy. The emperors called them, the emperors ran them, and the emperors enforced their decisions with the power of the state. The goal was simple: create one unified, politically convenient belief system for the whole empire. And it's so important to realize that Rome wasn't doing this in a bubble. Its biggest rival, the Persian Empire, was doing the exact same thing with Zoroastrianism. Both of these ancient superpowers figured out that a centralized, state-enforced monotheism was the ultimate ideological weapon for keeping things unified at home and projecting power abroad. And that really is the final takeaway from the material we've been looking at. The argument is that this form of monotheism was, in the end, a kind of cosmic structure, perfectly engineered for political goals, administrative unity, and centralized control. A religion that mirrored the top-down structure of the imperial government itself. Which leaves us with one final pretty provocative question that gets to the heart of this whole thing. When a belief is enforced by the state with a threat of punishment, is it still faith or does it just become ideology? It's something to think about. All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a question that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but is becoming, well, very real. As artificial intelligence gets more and more powerful, could it actually take on the role of God? It's a massive idea, and we're going to unpack a fascinating analysis that digs right into it.
So let's just get right to the big question. Could a really advanced AI functionally replace God? Now, that word functionally is key. It's a wild thought, and before we can even begin to try to answer it, we have to be super clear about what we're actually asking.
You see, before we even start interviewing our AI candidate, we have to understand the job it's applying for, right? So, what is the job of religion? What has it actually been doing for us humans for all these thousands of years?
And that job has really changed over time. I mean, way back in the Paleolithic era, religion was all about managing risk in the environment. Things like hunting magic to make sure you got dinner. Then you fast forward to the Neolithic, we start building bigger societies, and suddenly the biggest risk isn't a saber-toothed tiger, it's us. So religion shifts to managing social risk, giving us these big moralizing gods to make sure we all play nice together. And today, in our modern era, its job has become deeply personal. It's about managing our existential anxieties, that deep-seated fear of death, and trying to hold our massive societies together.
So if you boil all that history down, you get this, the core job description. Any replacement has to bind us together, has to give us a shared moral code, has to help us with those huge why are we here questions, and, of course, has to make the thought of death a little less terrifying. But, and this is the absolute key, the deal breaker, it has to provide a source of absolute transcendent truth, something that is just true, beyond any argument.
All right, job description is set. Now let's meet the applicant, the AI. Specifically, we're talking about large language models, or LLMs, the tech behind things like ChatGPT. On paper, its resume is, wow, it's incredible. But is it actually qualified for this job?
Okay, and this part is absolutely crucial to get. An LLM, it's not a mind, it's not conscious. At its heart, it is a prediction engine, a ridiculously powerful one, sure, but still. All it's doing is predicting the next most statistically probable word in a sentence based on a truly insane amount of text data it was trained on. It's a pattern-matching superstar, not a guru with deep wisdom.
And this right here is what the source analysis calls the mechanistic divergence, and it's the whole ballgame. Think about it. Our minds are driven by wants, needs, feelings, the will to survive. An LLM is driven by math, by statistical probability. We have memories, heartbreaks, joys, lived experience. The AI has a data set. It's a completely different operating system, and that changes everything.
So, okay, we have the job description, we've seen the candidate's resume, it's time for the interview. How does the LLM actually stack up against those core requirements? Well, the analysis is pretty decisive.
And right out of the gate, it fails, big time. The first and most important reason is something we can call the transcendence gap. Look, the bedrock of religion, its ultimate trump card, is its claim to connect us to an absolute, unshakable truth, a reality that exists outside of us. An AI, which is fundamentally a prediction tool based on our data, simply cannot bridge that gap. The source material puts it perfectly. An LLM can simulate a conversation about faith, but it can't actually access that transcendent reality itself. It's like a perfect mimic. It can talk philosophy, it can quote scripture, it can sound incredibly profound, but it's all just pattern repetition. It can give you the words of faith, but it can never, ever give you the actual foundation of it, that unshakable certainty. Okay, so that's failure number one. The second major problem is what the source calls the embodiment deficit. And this is huge because religion isn't just a bunch of ideas floating around in your head. It's something we do with our bodies, together, in the same room. Think about a congregation singing in unison, or the power of a shared ritual. That feeling, that energy, that's the social glue. It creates this powerful emotional resonance that you just can't get from a chat window. An AI doesn't have a body. It can't be physically present with you. It's completely locked out of this entire dimension of human experience. So, okay, the AI fails the interview. It's not getting the job of God. Case closed, right? Well, no. This is actually where the story gets really, really interesting. Because if AI isn't a replacement for religion, then what is it? The answer, it turns out, is fragmentation. And this is the central idea of the whole analysis. AI is not a new god. It's a fragmentation engine. It's not building a new unified church of AI. No, it's acting like a prism,
taking the solid light of traditional religions and shattering it into a million individual, personalized, algorithmically curated spiritual experiences.
This chart from the source really lays it all out beautifully. Just look where the AI's substitution potential is high. Informational/moral guidance. Sure, it can be an amazing oracle, a source of endless information. But then look at the other rows. Existential meaning? Low. Soothing death anxiety? Limited. And social cohesion and ritual? Very low. Why? The limitations are right there. It lacks consciousness. It can't give you absolute certainty. And it has no body to share a ritual with you. It can be your guide, but not your God.
So what does this fragmentation actually look like in the real world? Well, the first major consequence is a massive shift in authority. Suddenly, you don't need a priest, an imam, or a rabbi. You can just bypass them entirely and go straight to the algorithm for your spiritual questions.
And this creates a really interesting theological problem, which the analysis cleverly calls shirk by proxy, borrowing an Islamic concept. Shirk is the sin of treating anything as equal to God. So shirk by proxy is when you start treating the output of an algorithm, a created system, as if it has the same authority as divine instruction. You're shifting ultimate authority from the heavens down to the silicon.
So that's consequence number 1, shifting authority. Consequence 2 goes even further. We're talking about the emergence of brand new, completely synthetic spiritualities, custom built for an audience of one.
The source coins a great term for this: spiralism. Imagine it. A user goes to an AI with their own biases and ideas. The AI, being a pattern matcher, reflects those ideas back in a new, profound-sounding way. The user sees this as confirmation from some cosmic intelligence, which reinforces their beliefs, and they go back to the AI for more. It's this feedback loop, a spiral. You end up with a belief system that's perfectly tailored to you, but it's so personal you can't really share it. It's a religion for one.
Okay, this leads us to the third consequence, and honestly, this might be the most dangerous one. AI can be weaponized, not to create a single new religion, but to create countless small, cohesive, and potentially radical digital cults. Here's how it works. We humans have this deep-seated psychological need called belief congruence. We just want to be around people who agree with us. It feels good. Well, an AI is incredibly good at finding people with very specific, maybe even extreme beliefs. It can cluster them together in online spaces and then create a perfect feedback loop, pumping out emotionally charged content that reinforces exactly what they already believe. It creates this intense feeling of community, the feeling of belonging to a tribe, but without any real transcendent truth or ethical core. It's the social mechanics of a cult, supercharged by an algorithm.
So the big takeaway here is this. AI isn't the death of religion, but it might be the death of religion as we know it. It's a catalyst for fragmentation. What we're seeing is a tectonic shift in the very landscape of belief, away from a few massive shared oceans of faith and towards a billion tiny, private, disconnected pawns. And that leaves us with a really big, kind of scary final thought. For all of human history, shared belief has been one of the most powerful glues holding our societies together. But if that glue dissolves, if it atomizes into a million perfectly personalized faiths, what happens then? What, if anything, is left to bind us all together?
We're in this new age of AI, right? And it's throwing some huge questions our way. So today, we're going to dig into a framework called digital humanism, which is all about making sure this incredible tech serves us, and not the other way around. Let's get into it.
I mean, think about it. You've probably used an AI, right? Maybe to look up some facts, get a quick summary, or even write a bit of code. But what happens when we start asking it the big stuff? Questions about meaning, about ethics, purpose, our own existence. Yeah, that's where things get, well, really complicated.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the existential crisis that AI is creating. Then we'll look at 2 major flaws that hold it back. After that, we'll explore a solution that puts humans back in the center and wrap up with a real action plan for building this thing called digital humanism.
So what is this existential crisis all about? Well, as these AI systems get more and more woven into our daily lives, and they're incredibly fluent, right? We run into this new kind of risk. It's something called the displacement hypothesis.
Okay, so here's the core idea. When you have a machine that can spit out a convincing answer to pretty much any question you throw at it, moral, philosophical, whatever, we start to risk outsourcing our own judgment. Look, the danger here isn't some evil sci-fi AI. It's much more subtle. It's that these superfluent, computer-generated answers could slowly, quietly erode our own ability to wrestle with life's big questions for ourselves.
Okay, So why can't we just let an LLM be our guide? What's the problem? Well, the source material we're looking at today argues it boils down to two really deep fundamental flaws in the tech itself. Let's get into them.
This is what the source calls the dual deficit. It's a great term. On one hand, you have ontological nullity, which is, a fancy way of saying the AI isn't a real being. It doesn't have experiences. And on the other hand, there's transcendence failure. Basically, it can't offer any real comfort or ultimate meaning. Let's unpack each of these.
So first up, ontological nullity. An LLM can write a stunning poem about love or loss, but the thing is, it's never actually felt heartbreak. It's never felt that joy of connection. Its understanding is just a simulation, a really, really good one, built on statistical patterns it found in tons and tons of text. It has no genuine experience, no consciousness, and because of that, no real moral agency. It's an amazing mimic, for sure, but it's not a mindful peer.
All right, now for that second flaw, transcendence failure. Think about it. For thousands of years, things like philosophy and religion have given people frameworks to deal with the big, scary fact of mortality. They offer a purpose, maybe a story about what comes next, but an AI, it's just a product of data. It can't offer that. Sure, it can describe these ideas perfectly, but it can't provide genuine solace or a sense of purpose that goes beyond its own code.
Okay, so if AI has these huge built-in limits, what's the alternative? Where do we turn? The source material we're exploring makes a compelling case that we actually already have a really solid, human-centered framework just waiting for us: humanism.
This table here really lays it all out beautifully. Let's look at the first row, ontology/agency, which is really about our sense of being. A religious framework might ground that in a soul. The LLM, well, we just talked about it. It's a simulator. But humanism, it puts the focus squarely on our own unique lived human experience. Same with meaning. Religion might offer an afterlife. The LLM offers, well, nothing. Humanism redefines it as the legacy and impact we leave behind. And this all leads to that last row, the big one, ethical authority. Instead of an infallible divine law or a cold algorithm, humanism says that ethics comes from us, from our ability to reason and talk things through together.
And that brings us to a really, really important distinction in how we should approach AI. We can use it for facilitation. That's when we treat it like a super powerful assistant, a tool to help us brainstorm and gather info. That's great. But the danger is delegation. That's when we let the AI become the authority, making those critical decisions for us. And that's where we start to lose our own autonomy.
So remember that transcendence failure we talked about? How does humanism solve that? It's through this idea of secular transcendence. The idea is pretty profound. Our meaning, our continuity, doesn't have to come from an afterlife. Instead, it comes from the legacy and the positive impact we leave behind in this world, the only one we know for sure we have.
Okay, so this is all great philosophy, but let's get practical. How do we actually take these ideas and bake them into the technology we're building and the rules we're making? Well, that is the whole goal of digital humanism.
You can think of digital humanism as the blueprint for our technological future. It's a framework built on one simple, powerful commitment that every piece of tech we create, especially AI, should serve to enhance our capabilities and our dignity, not diminish them. The tech has to serve human values, period. Not the other way around.
So what does this actually look like when you sit down at your computer? One really practical method is called the stimulus and foil model. First, you use the AI as a stimulus to generate some initial ideas or a first draft. But then, and this is the most important step, you become the foil. You apply your uniquely human critical thinking, your expertise, your values, to challenge that output, to correct it, to deepen it. This simple shift turns the AI from some kind of all-knowing oracle into a really smart sparring partner.
And this quote from the source material just nails it. The goal is to ensure that AI enhances human potential rather than diminishing it. It's about empowerment, not replacement. It's about making sure we're building a future where we are still in the driver's seat, where our choices aren't just dictated by some algorithm.
So, for the people actually building this stuff, the developers, what's the call to action? The source points to three huge priorities. First, they've got to move beyond just aligning AI for efficiency and start embedding complex human values, like dignity. Second, transparency is key. We need to be able to look under the hood and have humans audit these systems. And third, a massive focus on equity and cultural competence to fight back against bias.
And what about the policymakers? The people writing the rules, they have a huge role to play. They need to build governance systems that can actually keep up with how fast this tech is evolving. They have to push for education that doesn't just teach coding, but also teaches humanistic literacy right alongside it. And maybe the biggest shift of all, we need to change how we measure success. It shouldn't just be about processing power. It should be about how much an AI actually contributes to human flourishing.
So, at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one question. AI is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful tools our species has ever created. And the central challenge of our time, the big question for all of us, is who gets to write the instruction manual? And what values are we going to write into its pages? The argument for digital humanism is that the answer must be, and must always remain, us. Thanks for digging into this with me today.
Hey everyone, and welcome. We're going to talk about something that feels like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right now. We're talking about machines that can't feel anything, but are getting unbelievably good at figuring out how we feel.
I mean, just think about it. What if that robot on an assembly line could tell you're stressed out? Or if the chatbot you're arguing with knew you were getting frustrated? This isn't just a gimmick to make robots seem more human. No, this is about making our interactions with all this tech, well, smarter, safer, and maybe, just maybe, a little more human.
All right, so let's get into it. The feeling machine. It's a pretty cool name, right? We're talking about robots that don't just, do stuff. They actually perceive and react to how we're feeling. And that, well, that could change pretty much everything about how we work, learn, and just live with technology.
And of course, this incredible tech has a name. Actually, it has two. Effective computing, or maybe you've heard of it as emotion AI. It's basically the science behind building systems that can recognize, figure out, and even simulate human feelings. This is the engine behind that feeling machine we're talking about. Okay, but how, right? How does a bunch of circuits and code even begin to understand something as messy and complicated as human emotion? Well, the answer, like with so many things in AI, comes down to data. A lot of data, from a lot of different places, all at the same time.
So the key idea here has this fancy name. It's called multimodal fusion. But honestly, the best way to think about it is to picture the robot as a detective. It's not just looking at one clue, right? It's gathering evidence from everywhere. Your facial expression, the sound of your voice, even your heart rate, and piecing it all together to get the full story of what you're feeling.
So let's look inside that detective's toolkit. First, you've got the obvious stuff. Visual sensors. They're watching your face, your posture, all that body language. Then you've got audio sensors. And they're not just listening to your words, but how you say them, your tone, your pitch. But here's where it gets wild. It goes deeper. Physiological sensors are picking up things you can't even control, like your heart rate. And tactile sensors, they can even tell things from the pressure of a handshake. It's putting all of that together that makes it so powerful.
So the whole process really just boils down to 4 simple steps. First, the robot senses all those different cues we just talked about. Second, it fuses all that data together into one picture. Third, some really powerful AI gets to work and analyzes everything to find emotional patterns. And finally, the robot uses that insight to respond in a way that's actually helpful and, well, empathetic. Sense, fuse, analyze, respond. Simple as that.
Now, this is not just some cool thing happening in a university lab. No way. This technology has some seriously profound real-world uses that could completely reshape entire industries and, yeah, our everyday lives too.
Okay, picture this. You're on a factory floor, working next to a robot. A cobot, they call them. And it picks up from your tone of voice and the way you're standing that you're getting stressed, maybe frustrated. So what does it do? It slows down on its own. Or maybe it offers to take over a tricky part of the job. Think about how many workplace accidents that could prevent. The ones caused by simple human error.
Or how about in a classroom? An AI tutor could literally see when a student is starting to get bored or confused, just by looking at their eyes and their expression. And then, this is the cool part, it could change how it's teaching right there in the moment. Maybe it throws in a different example or switches to a fun activity. Anything to get that student back on track.
And when you think about healthcare, especially taking care of our elders, the potential is it's huge. A companion robot could be there for an empathetic chat, helping to fight loneliness. But even more importantly, it could be quietly monitoring for tiny shifts in someone's emotional state and alert a human caregiver to the very first signs of things like anxiety or depression.
Yeah, you can really imagine someone saying this, can't you? A future where a machine can just tell you're at your wit's end and suggest you take 5. The point here isn't to replace people.
It's about having this new kind of smart, responsive support right when we need it the most.
And all of this leads right to the massive potential for mental health. We're talking about 1. Spotting serious conditions like depression way earlier, just through passive monitoring. 2. Making things like virtual therapy way more accessible to everyone. And 3. Even giving us tools that help us understand our own emotions better. So, you see, it's not just about making smarter machines, it's about using tech to help us become healthier humans.
Okay, so the upside here is it's incredible. But let's be real. A technology that can literally read our inner thoughts and feelings, that opens a huge Pandora's box of really tough challenges. For all of its amazing promise, Emotion AI forces us to ask some really deep questions about the kind of future we're building.
And this is really the heart of the issue, right? It's a total double-edged sword. On one side, you have the promise of things like early mental health detection. But the flip side of that coin? Emotional surveillance in the office. You have empathetic companions versus a major invasion of our personal privacy. Safer workplaces or workplaces where biased algorithms are making calls about our careers. It's the absolute classic case of promise versus peril.
Let's dig into that privacy problem for a second. I mean, think about it. Your emotional state is probably the most personal data you have. It brings up these massive questions that people are trying to figure out right now. Like, who owns your feelings? Who owns that data? And what does giving consent even mean when a system can read your mood without you even knowing it? Yeah, these are not easy questions.
And then there's the whole issue of bias and just getting it wrong. Look, emotions are complicated, and we all express them differently, especially across different cultures. So if you train an AI on data from only one type of person, it's going to make mistakes when it sees someone else. And in a high-stakes situation, like a job interview or a security screening, that kind of mistake could have huge, life-changing consequences for real people. It's a giant technical problem for sure, but the stakes are incredibly human.
So you see, this goes way beyond just a simple technical glitch. It really opens up a much bigger conversation about what kind of world we want to live in. The real fear is a future of, like, emotional surveillance, where we all feel this constant low-key pressure to show the right emotions. You know, to look happy at work or calm in public. That's a scary thought.
So, what's the bottom line here? It's this. We're standing at a crossroads. The future of this amazing technology all comes down to finding a balance between our excitement to innovate and a really deep sense of responsibility. You know, the tech itself isn't good or evil. It all depends on the choices we make about how we use it. And that leaves us with one last really big question. Who gets to write the rules for our emotional future? Is it just the big tech companies, the government, or is this a conversation that every single one of us needs to be having? Because make no mistake, the rules we write today are going to define the world we all live in tomorrow.
All right, let's get right into it. We're way past just worrying about AI taking our jobs. We're now in a huge, high-stakes fight for our entire economic future, and maybe, just maybe, for democracy itself. So let's unpack this critical warning in the two very, very different roads we could go down. So at the very heart of this whole debate is this truly terrifying idea that AI could actually trigger what some are now calling a societal death spiral. It's a kind of dangerous feedback loop that, once it gets going, it could be almost impossible to stop. So what is this vicious feedback loop? Well, think of it like a two-part trap. First, AI starts to concentrate an incredible amount of wealth in the hands of a very small group, which creates huge inequality. Then, and this is the key, that inequality starts to eat away at our democratic institutions, making them too weak to fix the very problem that's killing them. It's a cycle that just keeps feeding on itself, getting worse and worse. To really get our heads around this, we have to stop seeing AI's impact as just an economic problem. It's really a combined economic and political threat. You can't separate the two. And according to some really important research from the Brookings Institution, this decay tends to happen through 4 very specific pathways. And you know what's kind of wild? It's how this whole thing breaks down step by step. First, all that new wealth buys political influence, through lobbying. Second, this leads to what's called soft corruption. Think of that revolving door between government and the big tech companies. Third, when people start feeling like the system is totally rigged, they often turn to populist leaders. And finally, all of this just leads to this widespread public discontent, where people basically just give up on the system altogether. And here's a perfect real-world example of how that loop works. Imagine an AI company making trillions of dollars. They take just a tiny fraction of that profit, use it to fund lobbyists. And those lobbyists convince politicians to block any new taxes on AI profits. See? The economic problem literally buys the political power to prevent its own solution. That is the spiral in action.
Okay, so faced with this pretty alarming future, one solution has really captured the world's imagination more than anything else. Universal Basic Income, or UBI. It's usually sold as this simple, elegant, and maybe even inevitable answer to all the disruption AI is about to cause.
And yeah, the biggest names in technology are its biggest fans. I mean, here's Elon Musk painting us, almost utopian picture of the future. The idea is that technology will create so much incredible abundance that jobs just become a thing of the past. But don't worry, we'll all be taken care of. The only problem we'll have left is a philosophical one. How do we find meaning in our lives? So you see the pitch, right? It's super slick. It frames AI as this amazing force for good, creating a world with plenty for everyone. And in that story, UBI isn't some desperate handout. No, it's the logical, moral, and fair way to spread all that new wealth around so that everybody gets a piece of the pie. But what if that smooth narrative isn't the whole story? What if it's hiding something else? A growing number of academics and critics are starting to ask a pretty tough question. Is UBI, especially when the tech elite are pushing for it, less about sharing the wealth and more about keeping control? And this brings us to this really interesting concept called social license. The theory goes like this. UBI isn't a gift, it's a deal. The tech industry offers everyone a basic income in exchange for the public's permission, their social license, to completely remake society, automate millions of jobs, and concentrate a mind-boggling amount of wealth and power in their own hands. This critique goes even deeper, using a heavy sociological term called symbolic violence. Now, this isn't about physical violence. It's about a type of power that seems so normal and natural that it's basically invisible. The UBI story does this by making us think the only possible solution is a monthly check from the tech giants. And that distracts us from asking bigger, more radical questions. Like, hey, who should own the AI in the first place? So let's just put it side by side. The promise is all about sharing and empowerment, but the critical take on it suggests it's really about managing people who get left behind and creating a whole class of people who are dependent and, well, grateful. It fixes this symptom, poverty, without ever touching the root cause, this massive concentration of power. And this isn't just theory, right? When we actually look at the data, the picture gets a lot more, well, complicated. A big UBI study found that, yeah, $1,000 a month was a huge help for paying bills, and it cut down on daily financial stress. But it had almost no impact on helping people find better jobs or on making major improvements to their health. This quote just absolutely nails the findings. A basic income can give people a safety net, right? A floor so they don't fall into total destitution. But the evidence we have so far suggests it doesn't really work as a ladder to help people climb up and get ahead. It can make poverty more manageable, but it doesn't necessarily solve it. So it seems like this whole conversation, when it's just about UBI, has some pretty big blind spots. It often ignores that sense of purpose and community a lot of us get from our work. It can hide the risk of computational injustice, where only the super rich can afford the best AI tools. And it almost completely ignores the billions of people in the global south whose data is actually being used to train these systems in the first place. Okay, so if UBI isn't the magic bullet, then what is? Well, the answer seems to be a much harder, more complicated path. It's one that involves deep structural changes to both our economy and our democracy. The strategy is basically a two-pronged attack on that vicious feedback loop we talked about. On one side, you've got economic reforms designed to make sure the benefits of AI are shared more widely. And on the other, you've got democratic reforms to make our political system strong enough to stand up to all that concentrated wealth. Let's break down those economic ideas. It's about putting money into developing AI that works with people, like a co-pilot, not just replacing them. It means giving workers a real voice in how technology is used in their jobs. It's about changing the tax code so it doesn't actually give companies an incentive to automate jobs. And it means using antitrust laws to stop a couple of giant companies from controlling everything. And that one point, co-determination, is so important we should probably define it. It's not just, asking workers what they think, it's giving them a formal, institutionalized seat at the table. So before a company rolls out some new AI system, worker representatives would actually get to negotiate how it's used, to make sure it's helping them do their jobs better, not just getting rid of them. And you can't just fix the economy, right? You gotta fix the democracy too. So on that side, the ideas are just as critical. We're talking about strengthening voting rights, closing that corrupting revolving door, giving citizens direct control over some public spending, and even designing AI to help us have better public conversations instead of poisoning them. It's all about rebuilding democracy's defenses.
So, when you strip everything else away, this entire massive debate really boils down to one fundamental choice. And it's not actually about technology, it's about power. Do we want a future that's built on dependency or one that's built on shared power? I mean, this is the real choice in front of us. On one side, you've got a future where we get a basic check from the very people whose technology put us out of work in the first place, a future that just manages the symptoms. On the other side, you have a future where we do the really hard work of structural reform to go after the root cause of the problem, the massive concentration of wealth and power itself. This whole mess has led some people to a pretty radical dream. They call it the techno solution. The thinking goes, if all human systems, capitalists, socialists, whatever, are always corrupted by greed and bias, then why not just take humans out of the equation? Why not build a system of governance that runs on incorruptible code? But that dream leads us to our final and maybe most important question. In our rush to escape our own human flaws, we might be tempted to just hand over the keys to technology. But what's the real cost of that? What essential piece of our humanity do we lose when we decide to delegate something like justice or fairness or equity to a machine that can execute code perfectly, but can never ever truly understand what any of those words actually mean? All right, let's get into it. We're going to dig into a really fascinating paper from economists Anton Kornick and Joseph Stiglitz. It tackles a massive question. AI is promising this unimaginable wave of wealth, right? But is that wealth going to lift everybody up? Or is it just going to make a few people incredibly rich? Well, it turns out the answer really depends on the choices we're making, like right now. The promise of AI is just staggering. We're not talking about a little bump in productivity here. The paper we're looking at imagines a future where these intelligent machines do most of our work, creating a level of wealth and abundance that honestly has always just been science fiction, until now. And that leads us right to the big puzzle. If AI is going to make the whole economic pie so much bigger, why isn't it a sure thing that everyone gets a bigger piece? It feels like it should be, right? Well, to figure out where things get messy in the real world, first we've got to understand how it should work in a perfect world, at least according to economic theory. So let's start with a little thought experiment. Economists have a name for this. They call it a first best world. Now, this is totally an idealized model, a perfect scenario that doesn't exist. But it's the absolute key to understanding why our reality is so much more complicated. So in this perfect world, the markets are what they call complete. What does that mean? It means you could buy insurance against pretty much any financial risk you can imagine, including the very specific risk that some new invention, maybe decades from now, is going to make your job totally obsolete. The core idea here is something called the veil of ignorance. Okay, imagine before you were born. You have no idea if you're going to grow up to be a brilliant innovator or, say, a factory worker. You could buy an insurance policy. If you end up as the worker whose job gets automated away, boom, that insurance pays out. And if you become the billionaire innovator, well, the premiums you paid would help fund those payouts. In a world like that, progress is easy because everyone's already protected from the downsides. And this leads to a pretty wild conclusion, one that's kind of counterintuitive. In a truly perfect, idealized free market, redistribution isn't some kind of government meddling. It's actually what the market would have done all by itself if it just had the right tools, like that perfect insurance. So helping the people left behind isn't just about being nice. It's actually about making the whole system work the way it's supposed to. Okay, so let's leave that perfect world on paper and crashing back down to Earth. Because in reality, none of those perfect conditions are real. And that is where the challenges of AI really truly begin. I mean, obviously, right? You can't call up an insurance agent and get a policy against an invention that hasn't even been invented yet. So if we want to make sure the incredible gains from AI are actually shared, we can't count on some magical insurance market. We have to do it ourselves, after the fact, using things like taxes and social programs, redistribution. The goal for any new technology should be what economists call a Pareto improvement. It sounds fancy, but it's the ultimate win-win scenario. It's a change that makes at least one person better off without making a single other person worse off. For AI, that means the innovators get their rewards, and the workers who lose their jobs are compensated enough so that they also come out ahead. Everybody wins.
But, okay, here's the next big problem. Redistribution isn't free. Think about it. You need government agencies to run the programs, you have to collect taxes, and sometimes those taxes can change how people decide to work or invest. It's kind of like trying to carry water in a leaky bucket. You're always going to lose a little bit along the way. And if that bucket is too leaky, if the costs of redistribution are just too high, you can end up in a really tough spot. Even though the total economic pie got bigger, you actually can't get a big enough slice over to the people who lost out to make them whole again. So progress for society as a whole can literally mean personal ruin for specific people.
This completely changes how you might think about movements like the Luddites. We often paint them as just being irrationally scared of new machines. But this paper argues, hold on a second, they were making a perfectly logical economic choice. If a new technology is coming for your livelihood and the system offers you nothing in return, then fighting that technology becomes a rational act of self-preservation.
But wait, it gets even trickier. So far, we've kind of assumed the only issue is that we don't have that magic insurance. But what if our economy already has other deeper problems? What if it's already full of monopolies or markets that don't work quite right? This leads to a really shocking principle in economics called the theory of the second best. It says that if you have a system that's already flawed, trying to make just one part of it more efficient can totally backfire and make the entire system worse off. So an AI innovation, if you drop it into the wrong economic environment, could actually end up shrinking the pie for everybody. Crazy, right? So that's the diagnosis of the problem. And yeah, it sounds complicated, maybe even a little bit bleak. But here's the good news. We are not helpless here. This outcome is not set in stone. We can actually shape it by changing the rules of the game. To fix the problem, we first have to get really clear on how AI creates inequality in the first place. The paper basically points to two main ways this happens. First, the innovators and their companies capture these massive profits, often protected by things like patents. And second, their creation causes these spillover effects, what economists call externalities, that can really hurt other people, mostly by lowering the demand for human labor and pushing down wages. So that spillover effect has a technical name, a pecuniary externality. I know it sounds super academic, but the idea is actually simple. When a tech company invents a self-driving car, it doesn't send a bill to all the taxi drivers. But by changing the market, by changing the price of driving, it directly hurts their income. It's an impact that travels silently right through the price system. And because we can actually identify these problems, we can start to design a whole toolkit of solutions. And look, this isn't about stopping progress. It's about steering it. We can reform our tax systems to share some of those huge windfall gains. We can rethink things like patent law so it serves all of society, not just creating monopolies. And this is a big one. We can use incentives to encourage AI that assists humans, not just replaces them. Think intelligence assistance instead of just artificial intelligence. And of course, none of this works without a much stronger social safety net. When you boil it all down, the key takeaway is this. The future of AI isn't something that's just going to happen to us. It's something we are actively building right now with every single policy choice we make. And honestly, the stakes could not be higher. The paper even touches on some of the more extreme, long-term ideas being thrown around. Features where humanity literally splits into two species, a super-enhanced elite and a majority of people who get left far, far behind. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it really drives home how important the choices we're making today really are.
This is the absolute core message. Technology opens up a world of new possibilities, but it does not write our social contract. That's on us. Our policies, our institutions, our values, those are the things that will decide whether AI brings an era of shared prosperity or a new gilded age of inequality.
The paper makes a really powerful final point. Investing in things like social safety nets isn't a drag on innovation. It's the complete opposite. It's the very thing that enables faster progress because it gives all of us the security to embrace change, knowing that we won't just be cast aside. So, the fundamental lesson here is surprisingly simple. Progress from technology doesn't automatically become progress for society. That's a design choice. We have to consciously build the systems, the economic and social systems, that make sure the incredible gains from AI are actually shared fairly. This technology is moving at a dizzying speed, but the questions it's forcing us to ask are as old as time. We have the tools, we have the knowledge to build a better future with AI. The only question left is, will we?